You ready? The Subcommittee on Information Technology and the Subcommittee on Government Operations will come to order. Without objection, the presiding member is authorized to declare recess at any time. Good morning. Today's hearing is part of this committee's continuing oversight of federal IT. This began with GAO's designation of information technology as high risk back in February 2015, and it's been a priority of ours ever since. The scorecard has evolved each iteration in response to GAO recommendations and also stakeholder feedback. At the last FITARA hearing, we spoke about expanding the scorecard to create a digital hygiene score for each agency. To move toward this goal, Scorecard 6.0, the one we're talking about today, adds two new graded categories. One category grades agencies' implementation of the MGT Act, Modernizing Government Technology Act. The second category, in preview mode only, is a cybersecurity metric designed to measure agencies' information security practices. Since the last scorecard, 5 agencies' grades increased, 8 agencies' grades stayed the same, and 11 decreased. I want to note that we assign these grades not to shame agencies, but rather to incentivize certain behaviors that will save money and increase security. One area where we've increased pressure is the continued lack of a direct reporting structure from the CIO to the agency head. 3 agencies have reorganized to give the CIO direct access since our last scorecard. To incentivize the remaining 9 agencies to change their reporting structures, we reduced their grades on Scorecard 6.0 by an entire letter grade. If every agency had a direct reporting structure, only 2 grades would have decreased on this scorecard. I urge those 9 agencies that have still not changed their reporting structures to comply with Executive Order 13833 and adjust their reporting structures without delays. And I will add that we haven't heard any reason why this shouldn't, any reasonable reason why this shouldn't be changed immediately. Today's hearing features 2 panels with officials from the Department of Agriculture, which received a D-, and the Department of Defense, which received another F+. F+ is kind of an interesting.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, Mr. Chairman. What was that again?
Yeah. Better than average failure, yes. USDA is one of the lighthouse agencies intended to lead the government in IT modernization. I want to hear how the agency plans to address stagnation in its FITARA scorecard grades and fix the organizational weaknesses in its IT practices so that it can better be a leader for other agencies. DoD continues to be the only agency with an F on the scorecard. DoD's failing score is, in part, due to the lack of transparency it provides into the majority of its IT spend. I hope to hear how DoD plans to increase transparency in the spending and investment decisions so that we can ensure the agency is responsibly spending the billions in taxpayer dollars we appropriate each and every year. As always, I'm honored to explore these issues in a bipartisan fashion with my friend and the ranking member of this subcommittee, the Honorable Robin Kelly from the great state of Illinois, as well as Chairman Meadows and Ranking Member Connolly from the Commonwealth of Virginia. I want to thank my distinguished colleagues and the witnesses for participating today. And now, without any further ado, the woman, the myth, and legend, Ms. Kelly, the Ranking Member. You're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before starting today's hearing, I do want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Meadows, and Ranking Member Connolly for your cooperation and leadership as our subcommittees continue to work together to oversee federal IT systems. It's been an honor and a privilege to work with each of you in this important area. Improving the capabilities of the federal government's IT systems is critical to our country's national security. A key part of that effort is the ongoing oversight our subcommittees have been conducting to hold agencies accountable for implementing the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act. Crucial to this oversight has been the scorecard that our subcommittees develop for grading agency progress and meeting the FITARA requirements. Today, our subcommittee has released the 6th version of the scorecard. The new scorecard has some notable changes since the last one we released. First, this scorecard adds a new category for grading agency performance and fulfilling the recently enacted Modernizing Government Technology Act. The MGT Act gives agencies the authority to establish working capital funds that can be used to modernize outdated legacy IT systems and enhance cybersecurity. The act was first introduced by none other than Chairman Hurd, and I was proud to be an original co-sponsor of this landmark legislation along with Chairman Meadows and Ranking Member Connolly. Last week, President Trump issued an executive order directing that agency heads take action to ensure that the CEO of the covered agency reports directly to the agency head. The new scorecard also previews a new area that relates to federal cybersecurity and will grade agencies on their progress in improving their information security programs. Recent data breaches like the September 2017 Equifax breach, in which hackers gained access to information over 145 million Americans, highlights the need to strengthen information security in both the government and private sectors. Today's scorecard shows that while some agencies have made progress, others have hit roadblocks in meeting the requirements of FITARA. For example, while some agencies like the National Science Foundation improved, going from a C- to a B+, others, as you've heard, like the Department of Defense, have fallen behind, going from a D in 2015 to an F today. This most recent scorecard performance has me concerned. 14 agencies received failing grades in their management of software licenses. That represents the loss of an important opportunity to save taxpayer funds. According to GAO, by improving in this area, agencies have the potential to achieve hundreds of millions of dollars in government-wide savings. The scorecard also demonstrates that several agencies are still failing to consolidate and reduce their number of federal data centers. For example, since June 2017, DoD has scored an F in meeting the metrics that were established by the Office of Management and Budget for consolidating and optimizing data centers. I look forward to hearing from today's agencies on the challenges they face in FITARA implementation and how Congress can be more helpful. Last year, the federal government spent almost $95 million on its IT systems. FITARA and by extension the MGT Act are critical to ensuring that agencies are making the necessary IT investments to transition to more modern, efficient, and secure technologies. The scored metrics provide an important measurement for assessing agency progress in achieving this goal. I, too, want to thank the witnesses for testifying today. Your background and expertise will be helpful to us as we examine ways to further strengthen the federal government's capabilities in the area of IT acquisitions and operations. And again, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Now it's a pleasure to recognize the distinguished gentleman from the Commonwealth of Virginia, Mr. Connolly, for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Hurd, Ms. Kelly, and Mr. Meadows. The four of us have formed a bipartisan team, and we're going to see this implementation of FITARA through on a bipartisan basis. And I think it's a great model for the United States Congress. I wish we could replicate it in so many other areas. But thank you for your leadership and cooperation. A lot of changes have occurred since our last scorecard hearing in November. We're on this, the sixth scorecard, we're emphasizing whether agency chief information officers are reporting to the agency's head or deputy, and whether agencies have a plan to set up a working capital fund pursuant to the MGT Act. It was signed into law at the end of last year. Working together on a bipartisan basis and with the Government Accountability Office, and I particularly cite Mr. Powner and his team for enormous cooperation and great, wonderful work. I believe the changes to the FITARA scorecard continue to measure accurately each agency's ability to manage the IT it has and the IT it seeks to acquire. As GAO will testify a little bit later, if all agencies do the basic tasks of 1, ensuring that their CIO reports to the head of the agency as outlined in FITARA, 2, establishes a working capital fund pursuant to the MGT Act, and 3, creates a software license inventory as required by the Megabyte Act, the grades for today's hearings would change. There'd be 5 A's, 14 B's, 5 C's, and no D's and no F's. We've identified the low-hanging fruit, which would improve grades across the table. These 3 simple steps are already laid in statute, and every agency should be adopting the reforms. While most agencies have made progress on the existing FITARA metrics, The addition of MGT implementation and the decision to lower a full letter grade for those agencies in which the CIO did not report to the agency head or deputy resulted in a number of lower grades from the last scorecard. With the changes in methodology, only 5 agencies increased their letter grade, while 8 remained the same, and 11 received lower grades. Unfortunately, no agencies received an A grade on this scorecard, and for the 3rd scorecard in a row, as my 2 colleagues have already indicated, the Department of Defense once again receives an F+. Despite the lower grades, it's my hope that agencies can and will continue to improve their FITARA scorecard grades, especially with a new push from the White House in the innovation agenda led by Chris Liddell and Jared Kushner. Since FITARA was signed into law more than 3 years ago, this committee has stressed the importance of agency CIOs reporting to the head or deputy of the agency. Though not required by the FITARA legislation, we believe that CIOs could most effectively manage their IT projects when they speak to the agency head or deputy without having to maneuver through many additional layers of an organizational chart. In this scorecard, 9 agencies had their grades lowered because their CIO does not report to the head of the agency. On the plus side, I'm pleased that 3 agencies, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the National Science Foundation, and the Small Business Administration, have changed their CIO reporting structure for the better since the last hearing we had in November. I hope that with the issuance of the recent executive order on CIOs, which requires agencies, by the way, to make this simple organizational change, all agencies will now move quickly and make the necessary change so their CIOs can report to the head of the agency. One component that's been included in each of the last 6 iterations of the scorecard is the measure of agency progress toward consolidating and optimizing data centers. For this reason, I'm particularly disappointed there's been limited progress on this front, especially because of the savings that could be gained from improving in this area. In fact, this is one of the reasons, working with Mr. Penner and my colleagues, that we had the FITARA Extension Act, which was signed into law by President Trump, to make sure that we move the sunset provision, primarily to make sure that people can't wait out the clock with respect to this consolidation, which we think is very important. Compared to last November, only 5 agencies improved their scores on data center optimization, with the National Science Foundation joining HUD, GSA, and the Department of Education in receiving an A grade on this metric. On the other end of the spectrum, 5 agencies, including the Department of Defense again, received an F on this metric. Data center consolidation and optimization is important because agencies can here achieve real cost savings and reduce their environmental input and be better positioned to migrate to the cloud for better IT performance and security. In fiscal years 2016 and 2017, agencies reported a savings of $1.04 billion through their data center consolidation and optimization effort, with an additional $720 million in planned savings through the end of this year. Still, this amount is $978 million short of the goals set by the Office of Management and Budget. I urge agencies to continue to make progress in this area in order to reach OMB's goal of a savings of $2.7 billion by the end of fiscal year 2018. One of our witnesses here this morning is the Department of Defense. Received an F+ grade in the last 3 FITARA scorecards. The department received an F on all of the scorecards metrics except the portfolio stat, where it received a D. I'm particularly concerned that the department consistently does not employ incremental development in software projects and other IT investments. The use of incremental development reduces risks, increases the likelihood that each project will achieve its cost, schedule, and performance goals, and allows agencies to terminate a poorly performing investment with fewer sunk costs. However, of the department's 26 projects listed, it's only planning to deliver functionality incrementally in 2 of them. On data center consolidation and optimization, the Department of Defense has reported that it owns and operates 3,623 tiered and non-tiered data centers, and through August 2017 has only closed 834 of them. The Department has reported that it plans to close an additional 1,122 by the end of this fiscal year, and I certainly hope they achieve that goal. I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses today. Now that Congress has authorized agencies to establish working capital funds to reinvest savings to modernize technology, we must ensure that those agencies are using IT acquisition best practices to avoid the problems that have plagued IT spending in the past. I look forward to the testimony today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Now, let's get to why we're here, our witnesses. We have Mr. David Powner, Director of IT Management Issues at the Government Accountability Office. I think he holds the record for the number of times testifying before this committee. And we have three folks from the Department of Agriculture, Mr. Gary Washington, the CIO, Ms. Lynn Money, who is the CFO, and Mr. Donald Bice, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Administration. I appreciate y'all all being here. And pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before you testify, so please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. You can be seated. And in order to allow time for discussion, please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire written statement has been made part of the record. As a reminder, the clock in front of you shows the time remaining during your opening statement. It'll turn yellow when you have 30 seconds left, and when it turns red, please wrap up. Also, remember to press the button and turn on your microphone before speaking. Mr. Powner, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Hurd, Ranking Members Kelly, Connolly, and members of the subcommittees, I would like to thank you and your staff for your continued oversight on IT management with this 6th set of grades. Your persistent and thorough oversight has made a difference in managing federal IT. Here are some of the key highlights on progress. On incremental development, when you held your first scorecard hearing in November 2015, 58% of the government's software development projects were planning to use a 6-month incremental approach. Now this percentage is up to 87%, and 19 of the 24 agencies receive an A or a B on the scorecard. Regarding data centers, collectively, we have closed about 7,000 centers and saved nearly $4 billion. With software licensing, when you previewed this a year ago, only 3 agencies had an inventory, now 10 do. But more importantly is the cost savings associated with this area. Last scorecard, we only saw about $50 million in savings from this initiative. This year alone, we expect $340 million government-wide from consolidating these licenses. That's 3.5 times the Central Technology Modernization Fund. And we also have had 4 agencies change their reporting structure, where they now report to the agency head. This progress would not have happened to this extent without your scorecard and oversight. There are 2 significant changes to Scorecard 6.0. One, there is a 6th area to grade with the MGT Act and the establishment of working capital funds. The bottom line here is not enough agencies are committing to establishing these working capital funds, although there does seem to be a solid commitment from DHS, Labor, and SBA. Establishing these funds are critical so that savings from software license, data center optimization, and portfolio stat efforts can be reinvested in agency IT modernization priorities. It is important to note that these 3 areas on your scorecard have the potential to each result in additional savings that are greater than the $100 million Technology Modernization Fund. The second change is a greater weighting to the Cio Reporting category. Previously, agencies received a plus or a minus whether they reported appropriately. As my written statement highlights, CIOs have reported to us that this reporting structure is critical to carrying out their responsibilities. This reporting matters. It gives CIOs a real seat at the management table, and it will help to attract more qualified individuals to these positions over time. This reporting was also reinforced last week in the President's executive order on enhancing agency CIOs. The 9 agencies that did not report appropriately had their grades lowered a full letter grade. In addition, the scorecard previews a cyber grade that is based on 50% based on an annual IG assessment and 50% on a self-assessment of how agencies stack up against 10 cyber metrics reported quarterly to OMB. These metrics include intrusion detection and authentication associated with high-impact systems. With the MGT and CIO reporting changes, we saw 5 agency grades go up: HHS, Energy, Transportation, Labor, and NSF. 8 agencies didn't change while 11 went down. As Ranking Member Connolly stated, there would be major improvements to these grades if agencies simply did 3 things. 1, report to the agency head. 2, establish a working capital fund. And 3, have a complete software license inventory. The grades from 3 Bs, 12 Cs, and 8 Ds, and 1 F would change to 5 As, 14 Bs, and 5 Cs, we would not have a single D or an F. These 3 actions and the associated higher grades are doable by the next scorecard. Turning to the Department of Agriculture. Agriculture plans to spend over $2 billion on IT this year. 83% of this is for operational systems. They have received a C since the second scorecard and would have had another C, but because their CIO doesn't report to the agency head, their grade was lowered to a D. Solidifying this reporting is important since the average CIO tenure at agriculture is only 1.8 years. They have had 9 CIOs since 2004 and 6 since 2012. Positive areas for agriculture: 80% of their software development projects use an incremental approach. They have closed over 2,000 non-tiered or smaller data centers and 20 large data centers and have received an A in the software license area. The savings in both the data center and portfolio stat areas are low compared to other agencies their size and is the main reason for low grades in these areas. Regarding the cybersecurity area, the IG assessment is a 2 out of 5 in each of the 5 NIST framework areas, and they self-report meeting 5 of the 10 OMB cyber metrics. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my comments on the Department of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Powner. Now I think there's going to be one statement for all of USDA and Mr. Bice, I was told, or Mr. Washington's delivering that. Mr. Washington, you're now recognized for 5 minutes. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chairman Hurd, Chairman Meadows, Ranking Member Kelly, and Ranking Member Connolly, and the members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to appear before you today to share the United States Department of Agriculture's progress on the implementation of the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act. We would also like to thank you for your continued commitment to improve information technology management across the federal government. The United States Department of Agriculture touches the lives of every American through its mission to provide leadership on agriculture, food, natural resources, rural infrastructure, nutrition, and related issues through fact-based, data-driven, and customer-focused decisions. To successfully accomplish this mission, the Department operates more than 300 programs through an extensive network of federal, state, and local cooperators. Secretary Perdue and Deputy Secretary Sinsky committed to creating a new operating model for information technology at USDA. We announced in December 2017 that USDA is implementing 4 key IT modernization strategies that are consistent with the FITARA goals: strengthen strategic IT governance, consolidate end-user services and data centers, enable a strategic approach to data management, and improve the USDA customer experience. USDA teamed with the White House Office of American Innovation and the General Services Administration Centers of Excellence to accelerate execution of these activities. In 2015, at the inception of FITARA, USDA assumed a leading position with an A on our Common Baseline Plan. Since 2015, USDA continues to move forward to meet the spirit of FITARA by reducing the number of CIOs across the department, the only CFO Act agency that implemented the IT management maturity model, and one of 6 agencies to receive an A on the megabyte portion of the scorecard. USDA has consistently proved itself as a leader in embracing FITARA. We continue to implement FITARA across USDA and definitely integrate it into our daily processes and IT modernization activities. To improve leadership alignment and the efficiency of operations across USDA's information technology activities, the department decreased the number of positions with the title Chief Information Officer from 22 to a single USDA CIO. An assistant CIO responsible for IT activities in each mission area, rural development, and departmental administration have been designated in permanent or an acting capacity for a total of 9 assistant CIOs within USDA. Standard performance elements for evaluation of assistant CIOs are created under my direction at USDA. In addition, the department rechartered the Executive Information Technology Investment Review Board to focus its efforts on the review of strategic IT investment rather than transactional decisions. The USDA integrated the IT governance framework process and acquisitions approval requests as the foundation for the USDA's FITARA Common Baseline Plan. Implementation of the USDA governance framework enabled the department to take an enterprise approach to IT and improve the quality of project planning and execution, reducing overall project risk. As a CIO, I actively engage with all key stakeholders through IT governance and investment management processes. For example, I hold regularly monthly engagements with program, project, and investment managers and agency leadership to evaluate and discuss the portfolio health of their investments. USDA supports the Data Center Optimization Initiative as part of the USDA's new IT operating model to consolidate IT infrastructure services under the management of the CIO. The department set a goal of reducing its data center footprint and movement to the cloud from a baseline of 39 tiered data centers to 2 enterprise data centers by the close of fiscal year 2019. To date, in 2018, USDA has closed 18 data centers. Overall, USDA has closed 2,100 data centers through DCOI and the Federal Data Center Consolidation Initiative. USDA's cost avoidance and savings from the DCIO data center consolidation activities for fiscal year 18 of $4.68 million. In fiscal year 19, USDA anticipates a $10 million savings resulting from rate reductions for all department-level hosting shared services offerings. Finally, USDA commits to using effective category management to leverage USDA's buying power and to reduce overall costs. We are currently consolidating end-user support services from 26 agencies and offices across the department into a single support organization within OCIO. We are also consolidated 74,000 copies of Adobe Acrobat through an enterprise license savings of $9.2 million. IT modernization and implementation of FITARA at USDA is a part of a purposeful strategy to improve the return on investment that IT spending creates through business outcomes for the department's customers. Thank you for your thoughtful approach and support of this important legislation that is having a positive impact on USDA's ability to rapidly implement a comprehensive IT modernization strategy and operating model. I look forward to your questions and to continue to work with you to further improve IT implementation at USDA and across the federal government.
I've always wanted to know why y'all were designated the a lighthouse agency, but I think you explained some of the reasons why. So thank you, Mr. Washington. Ms. Kelly, you're now recognized for the first round of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The committee's scorecard makes clear that while some agencies have made progress, others continue to struggle in their implementation of FITARA. For example, the new scorecard shows that the overall letter grades for 11 agencies actually went down, A grades stayed the same, and only 5 agencies increased. Mr. Powner, you talked about 3 action areas that if the agencies followed their scorecards would increase. In your assessment, what accounts for the challenges agencies appear to be facing when it comes to improving their scores?
So there's many things on this scorecard, but those 3 basic things are just the way we've always done things at agencies. Some CIOs are buried in the agencies. We need to elevate them. This working capital opportunity to reinvest savings is a great idea, and everyone should have a good inventory, whether it's software licenses or anything else. So those 3 things are really basic steps, and if we did that, even DOD would get a C.
Do you think it's more resistance from the agencies? That's what's stopping them from implementing these 3 things, just like the direct reporting. Can you explain how that can help improve the agency and save money?
Well, I think when you, especially in the large federated agencies, if you have support from the top with the direct reporting, it allows you to dip into the component agencies and really drive change. I think some of the federated agencies, they're so set in their ways and have always done things a certain way, they don't get the direction from the top, and that's why there's such a great opportunity for the portfolio stat savings, for data center consolidation. And we see progress. I mean, I think the idea of Mr. Washington talked about going down to 2-tiered data centers, that's great. I mean, we need to hear more of that across the government.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bice, according to the USDA's website, its CIO currently reports to the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Administration and not the Secretary or the Deputy. As you've heard, we talked about the President issued this executive order. What steps are you taking to restructure the reporting relationship so that the CIO reports directly to Secretary Perdue?
Thank you for the question. So I'd start off by saying that Secretary Perdue, even though he was one of the last secretaries to get confirmed, immediately started making reorganization and reforms within the department. He was confirmed in April 2017, and by May 2017, he had already announced his first reorganization. So we have the executive order that just came out. We've got the Cleaner Cohen Act. We've got the intention of FITARA. So we were going to look at all of those, and we will ensure that we are complying with the law. But I will say that under the reporting structures that we have, Mr. Washington, though he's been the acting since September 2017 CIO and the permanent CIO since February 2018, has done incredible things, as you heard in his statement. So I think we've got the support from the Secretary. We've got the right person as our CIO. So that's part of the reason we're the lighthouse agency, and it's part of the reason we've had such success so far. But we're committed to make sure that the CIO has all the authorities that the CIO needs to modernize IT in the Department of Agriculture.
So I'm hoping the next time we look at the scorecard, your score goes up because things have changed in that.
Would my colleague yield just for a second?
Of course.
Mr. Bice, I'm not sure you answered Ms. Kelly entirely correctly. There's now an executive order directing you to do that. So it's not a matter of choice anymore.
Correct. Right now, our delegated authorities, 7 CFR 2.89, actually provide to the CIO. The CIO reports directly to the Secretary of Agriculture on all information technology matters. What we need to do is probably change the org chart to match the delegation. So I agree that we will have no choice but to comply with the law and with the executive orders. I was just merely stating that we need to take a look at the latest that have come out to make sure that we are complying.
Thank you. Ms. Mone, as the acting chief financial officer, can you explain briefly from a budgetary standpoint what financial challenges, if any, does the department face in improving the management of its IT operations?
Thank you for your question. So,
and where do you think additional funding is needed?
well, we actually already have a working capital fund that's been in existence actually since 1943, and we have been working diligently through that mechanism to be able to centralize services and achieve those economies of scales across the department. We were actually excited about the MGT Act being passed because we believe it does afford us more opportunities to be able to carry out those IT modernization efforts that we want to do. So in terms of challenges, for the most part, when we use the working capital fund, it does give us that extra leverage because now we have no year type authority, which allows us to, again, most IT projects are not carried out in one single year. It does cross years. So again, having the MGT and potentially getting money from the TMF fund will give us that extra leverage that we need to be able to carry out those projects.
Can I ask one more question? And Mr. Washington, in what ways can Congress help you in your implementation efforts?
I believe currently that the CIO has all the authorities and the vehicles in place right now to continue down the modernization path that it's taken. We have new leadership at USDA. The CIO and the CFO have a tremendous working relationship. We have a great relationship with the Office of American Innovation. So I think currently, if we're judged on our progress towards our modernization goals, I think we have everything that we need at this time.
Okay. We expect your score to go up. Thank you. I yield back.
Now, I'd like to recognize the distinguished and knowledgeable gentleman from Montana, Mr. Gianforte, for your round of questioning.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking members. FITARA requires that agencies work with OMB to review all agency IT investments and, among other things, to increase efficiency and identify potential waste. I know you've done that. Because this review must be standardized, OMB launched the Portfolio Stat initiative. which requires agencies to conduct annual reviews of their IT investments. So my questions initially are for Mr. Washington. Could you walk us through your agency's portfolio review, and what were some of the opportunities you identified that could result in greater cost savings or efficiencies?
So we had a portfolio review with OMB in the month of March. We've identified a great number of areas where we could modernize potential cost savings, such as data center consolidation, what we're doing with category management and enhancing those activities, working with the CFO to make sure that we leverage shared services across the department and across the federal government. We're also using our cybersecurity improvements to ensure that we drive down costs and eliminate duplicities as well.
Could you share a little more details on some of those initiatives and what you're doing to implement them, and just share with us a little bit the size of the prize? What can we expect as we implement these efficiency gains that you've identified?
Sure. So the relationship with the Office of American Innovation, we have a framework for modernization, and it's not just about IT modernization. It's about reducing our cybersecurity, improving our cybersecurity posture at USDA. So over a 3-year period, we plan to consolidate our data centers and have 2 enterprise tiered data centers and give people the option to move to commercial cloud. We are working with our citizens and customer experience to ensure that we not only modernize our systems, but we give our customers, our farmers, ranchers, scientists, the experience that they deserve with the USDA. We're improving also, we're modernizing our networks from 17 to 4, which is another goal in 2020 as well.
Okay, and so you mentioned commercial cloud. If you had to score yourself, what percentage of IT systems at USDA are on a commercial cloud today?
Currently, between 5 to 10% of the systems in USDA are in commercial cloud. However, we have 40% of our systems that are cloud ready, and before 2020, we plan to significantly increase that number.
Okay, and so you have a goal to drive to the
Yes.
cloud with.
Yes, sir, we do.
In your portfolio review, did you find any duplication or waste, and how do you plan to reduce that?
We found duplication and waste. How we plan to eliminate that is we have an executive review board where we brief our undersecretaries on enterprise activities. We plan to work with our agencies to ensure that they are a part of the process, and it's a collaborative remediation to these issues, and work with our component CIOs and our CFO community to ensure that we're tracking our progress towards meeting our goals.
I applaud you for moving to more of a strategic approach to IT and away from transactional. You mentioned that earlier in your testimony. As you look out to the future, what does the optimized IT portfolio look like at USDA, let's say 5 years from now?
Well, I think the optimized IT portfolio in USDA, we will be more accurately measuring what the new investments that we've made in terms of how we service our citizens. It would be a business value approach and a business approach to delivering IT services. We will hopefully decrease the footprint and save the amount of money that we need to in IT and deliver more value.
Okay, and we've been talking quite a bit about reporting structure here today. I'm curious, the findings from the review of the systems, how did you personally communicate that to the Secretary?
Excuse me, sir?
The findings from the portfolio review, how was that communicated to the Secretary?
Well, I communicate that to the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Administration and the Deputy Secretary, and the Deputy Secretary communicates that to the Secretary.
Okay, so have you had a chance to sit down with the Secretary to go through your IT recommendations?
I have not had a chance of yet, but I do have opportunities to speak with the Secretary about improvements that we're making in IT.
Okay, and I think I've used up my time, so I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Connolly, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the panel. Mr. Powner, I believe you talked about a fair amount of turnover in terms of CIOs at USDA. if I did my math right, in the last 6 years, it's one a year on average. Is that correct?
Correct.
Why? Why such high turnover?
I don't know all the reasons for the high turnover, but I think it reinforces why you want that direct reporting to the top, because I agree, Mr. Washington has a lot of respect internally, but if he walks out the door tomorrow, will someone come in, have that respect immediately and access to the top? I don't think that necessarily that's the case.
Mr. Washington, how long have you been in your job?
So I've been in my job. Excuse me. I've been in my job in an acting capacity since September 6th. I became permanent on February the 4th.
Just since this February, then?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bice, why the high turnover in CIOs? I can tell you in the private sector, that would be a huge issue for CEO.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, I will say that Gary and I both became actings in September 2017 and both became permanent in February 2018. And both Gary and I have every intention to follow through on IT modernization and making the Secretary and the
I know,
Deputy's
but
plans.
tell us why you've had such high turnover.
Well, some of it might be, you know, we have both career and political CIOs in the past. We've had both. The last CIO, we are all senior executives. I'm a career federal employee, almost 30 years in the federal government, and we all are available to be moved to any additional position based on the needs of the department. So partly it's based on the sort of reality of our positions.
Well, the good thing is you've moved from 22 people with the title to 1. That's good. The turnover is not so good, and I think it is a management issue that has to be looked at. Telework. So when I went to the White House a few weeks ago with Mr. Hurd to meet with Mr. Kushner and Mr. Lidell to talk about the innovation agenda, your agency was the one that they've decided will be sort of the pilot project because, in part, Secretary Perdue offered it up, and that's fine. But Secretary Perdue reportedly cut back on telework in USDA because when he was looking for somebody, when he was making the rounds, that somebody happened to be working remotely that day on a telework program, and he reacted negatively to that. Either Mr. Washington or Mr. Bice, do you want to comment on that? Because that seems to be a step backward from our point of view. Telework is a very important key element in the deployment of the IT we're talking about here.
I'll handle that question. So, not aware of that particular incident that you're referring.
It was in the press.
I'm not personally aware of that particular incident you're referring to, but I will say that you are correct that the Secretary made a determination to change the assumptions behind the telework policies in the Secretary's parlance to ensure that supervisors were given the appropriate authority to manage to ensure the efficiency of the service was continued. So there was a policy change. Right now the policy is that people can telework up to 1 day a week. And there is also the ability, if there is a reasonable accommodation need, that did not change. If you have a reasonable accommodation need, you could telework more than that policy. In addition, if there are space limitations, we have several agencies that assumed their space based on the ability to telework. That did not change. You still, as an agency head, can change and allow telework beyond the 1 day a week.
Okay. Well, I hope you'll take the word back. I mentioned it at the White House that I thought it was a retrograde move. We think telework is very important, and we don't want to see any backsliding. And we've seen a lot of progress in USDA particularly. And so we don't want to lose that. And the fact that maybe there was a negative experience by the Secretary ought not to be a reason for reversing or changing substantially the telework policy. And what we hope we don't get into, well, is setting legislative metrics for you. So we hope the cooperative spirit will continue. If there's another round, I want to get into data centers because I didn't quite follow your numbers, Mr. Washington. If I heard you correctly, you said you're going to go from 39 to 2 by FY 2019. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Blum, you're now recognized for your round of questions.
Thank you, Chairman Hurd. Thank you for our panelists to be here. Good to see you again, Mr. Powner. Most of my questions, I think, are for you. I come from the private sector, so this government stuff here is new to me. And it's hard for me, also from the high-tech industry, so it's hard for me to understand. In a hearing last year in oversight, we uncovered that Social Security Administration spent $350 million of taxpayers' money on a project that was discontinued. I asked, did Lockheed Martin get paid? Yes. Did anybody lose their job? No. Okay, not like the private sector. Now in January, report comes out, Veterans Affairs has spent over $2 billion. $2 billion of taxpayer money on projects that were stopped or were failed. Mr. Powner, how does this happen? Just explain this to me in layman's terms so the people in my district in Iowa can understand this. How does this happen?
When you look at the failures across the government, we've looked at most of them. There's a lack of governance and accountability. I can't tell you how many projects, to really the heart and soul, what you guys are trying to do here with CIO authorities, the CIO is not involved with the project. We just reported on an electronic health record failure at the Coast Guard. There was no CIO involvement. There was no one even had any IT background. And the issue here is about the authorities and the span that the CIO has to govern over all IT at the departments and agencies. We need to know where the money's being spent so that we can have the right people involved with the right governance to effectively manage risk. And that doesn't always occur. I'm not saying it's right, because we think that's the wrong way to approach it, but that's the reality of what we see with a lot of these failures.
So you're telling me the CIO, Chief Information Officer of an agency like Mr. Washington, in these failures, they weren't involved in these billion-dollar IT projects? That's incomprehensible.
Yes, absolutely, that is the case, that they're not involved.
Is that ending? Has that ended? That can't continue.
Well, I think it's getting a little, I mean, the whole part of FITARA, too, is right to capture all of our spend. We have an initiative with the President's management agenda called the Technology Business Model, where we're going to capture more IT spend. It's not because we're finding every penny that goes to IT. It's because we get the right people engaged with the technology part of things. That's what's really important, that you get the right governance over the technology.
My colleague, Mr. Connolly, asked her a great question about the CIO turnover. This would be for anybody in the panel. Is it hard to find and keep really good IT employees in the federal government?
From my perspective, yes. In the 30 years that I've been at USDA, there has been quite a bit of turnover. Some of it is, frankly, the salary scale for a person who's managing, say, a $3 billion IT portfolio, or $2 to $3 billion, depending on the year, like Mr. Washington, would make far more than what the senior executive would make in the federal government. So you have some of that, salary pressure. The responsibilities are more, and as you pointed out, and from the private sector to the public sector, the rules and requirements are incredibly difficult to comply with at times. That aren't really even IT related. So I think there's some difficulty in finding qualified people for these positions.
And then keeping them. Do we have private sector type of incentives to keep Mr. Washington made this a good question for you, to keep people like yourself that are good here in the federal government?
I don't know if there are private industry incentives. I would have to know what those incentives are, sir.
I'm just talking about overall general compensation, job satisfaction.
Mr. Washington, this is a good time for you to ask for a raise.
Yes, sir.
And if I could,
that's where I was heading.
I think it would. I do not think we're compensated as well as our private industry counterparts in terms of the amount of responsibility and accountability that we have currently.
Mr. Powner.
We've seen some very qualified people enter the government because they're into mission and it's a patriotic move and that type of thing. But what's really key here, and it gets back to this reporting, who wants to accept a job as a CIO if you're buried down in the agency multiple layers? You want to report to the top and you want to have the right authorities. So I think it's not going to be about with compensation packages. It's going to be about having a position with the right authorities where you report appropriately and you can really help move the country forward.
And we're changing that. Or maybe we've changed that. Is that
We're going to
correct?
talk to,
'Cause I agree with that.
the CIO at DOD came great private sector experience. We can ask him what attracted him to DOD, because I guarantee he's making a fraction of what he made at JP Morgan. But it would be really good to explore with Mr. Deasy on that topic.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Blum. Mr. Bice, I just want to make sure I'm clear. By the next FITARA scorecard, we can fix that Manning chart to make sure Mr. Washington's reporting directly to the Secretary?
I know that's a yes or no question, and the answer is yes.
Excellent. Good to hear. Good to hear. Ms. Money, let's start with you, Ms. Money. The organization consolidated 22 CIOs to 1. Did Mr. Washington get all of the budget authority from those other 22 positions?
So the CFO shop is a little bit different in our organization than others. So I have, again, the working capital fund, and then the appropriations and authority and budget formulation for certain offices. From the department standpoint, the program offices actually get their budget formulated within OBPA, which is a different organization. So I really can't answer the question in terms of all the IT budget authority, only those related to the working capital fund. And I can tell you, related to that, the working capital fund, half of that budget is IT type projects.
Gotcha. So that sounded like a no.
Yeah.
Mr. Washington, do you feel like you got greater budget authority now that there is no longer 23 people with the title CIO?
Yes, sir, I feel like I do. I have tremendous there's transparency into all the IT spending at Department of Agriculture through the processes that we've set up in the government.
So could, if a element of the USDA was going forward on a project that you thought was going to increase the instability of the network, would you be able to stop it?
Yes, sir, I would.
Okay, that's good. Why? So y'all have implemented Megabyte. You know all the software that's on your system. Was it hard to do it?
No, sir, it was not. We put the proper governance structure in place, the tools in place, and the policies in place to make sure that we complied with FITARA and we had a sustainable process to ensuring that continued.
Is your network just as complicated as most other people's networks?
Yes, sir, it is.
Can you think of any reason why it would be hard to implement the software that counts what software is on your system?
I can't think of any reason, sir, why it would be hard.
Gotcha. Thank you. I'll open this up to all three of y'all. What percentage of the USDA budget is IT spend?
So the USDA has about $140 billion spend with both our mandatory and our discretionary authority, and we have about a $3 billion IT budget, so less than 3%.
Less than 3% of the total USDA budget is on IT spend. Mr. Washington, what are the top 2 or 3 most transformational IT programs? And and what I mean by transformational is what has like the game-changing potential for your agency? And I know this is an evaluative question, right? So what do you consider is game-changing?
I believe what is game-changing for the Department of Agriculture is our IT modernization program and our relationship with the Office of American Innovation, because we're approaching this from 5 different areas, and the goal is to provide value to our customers and citizens.
Talk to me about technology, like
technology.
A tool or capability. What is that 2 or 3 things that you really, that is transformational to y'all's operations?
What is transformational to our operations is our ability to consolidate from 17 networks to 4 and use software-defined networks and have a managed service to manage that across the department. We are embarking on robotics and our end-user support in our contact centers and being able to have an enterprise approach to those activities. digitizing our systems and having self-service portals so that we can have an automated approach to services our customers in the field.
Because one of the things I hope that we're able to do with the scorecard is we have to move from just looking at and collecting basic information to being able to collect information that helps us understand the value that the IT departments are providing to our enterprises, and then ultimately get to a point where we're able to say, what are those opportunities that we're going to be able to provide to our citizens? And I think in your opening remarks and some of your answers to the questions, y'all are thinking in that kind of perspective. On the time I do not have, I was going to ask about legacy code running on USDA. How many lines of each type of code do you have running on your systems? Do you know that number off the top of your head?
No, sir, I don't, but I can get that information to you.
Sure. And the other two questions that would be helpful on that is how many full-time and contract employees does it take to maintain that legacy code? And so those are the two questions. If you can get back to us, we'll make sure we submit that for the record. But would you agree that modernizing your agency's legacy IT includes updating all the legacy code into programming languages in use today?
Yes, sir, I do.
Excellent. And my last question is for you, Ms. Moni. I know y'all have a working capital fund.
Yes,
But it's not an MGT fund.
correct.
Right? And are there plans to create the MGT fund that Mr. Washington has control over?
So we have been in contact with OMB, and they have given us the go-ahead to incorporate. We don't have to create a new working capital fund. We can bring the MGT funds into our existing one. We just have to be able to track it separately, and we have the ability to do that.
Mr. Poundon, do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, if you're going to use I think the intent of what you set up, Mr. Chairman, is to create your separate working capital fund. If you're going to use an existing one, you need to be able to compartmentalize it, and this guy needs to be in charge of it. And that's the question with the use. There's 11 agencies, including AG, that said we're going to use an existing working capital fund. But a lot of those agencies also told us we haven't reported as much savings because we're afraid it's going to go away. So you can't say both things. If you're afraid it's going to go away, that means your existing working capital fund isn't working. So that's where there's a cautionary flag going up.
Mr. Moni, your rebuttal?
Yes, I would disagree with that in terms of USDA. As was stated earlier, myself and the CIO have a partnership, a collaborative partnership. He already, as the CIO, sits at the table at our existing governance board for the working capital fund. Once we set up this new fund, we have no issues giving him full authority over that funding, giving him the reports that he needs so he can track the expenses, obligations. So that will not be an issue at USDA.
Mr. Washington, you're going to have some more work to do, but the goal is to make sure you have the authorities you need to do your job. Ms. Kelly has some more questions.
I just wanted to tell Mr. Pounder I left here because I'm on foreign affairs. So Secretary Pompeo said he's at least going to try to raise it to a C. I asked him about their scorecard, so just reporting back. I wanted to talk a little bit about portfolio stat. According to the CIO.gov website, it's described as a tool that agencies can use, and I quote, to assess the current maturity of their IT portfolio management process, make decisions on eliminating duplication, augment current CIO-led capital planning and investment, and maximize the return on IT investments. Mr. Pounder, in other words, portfolio stat exists to save taxpayers dollars, it sounds like, and make sure they're wisely spent. Is that your
That's correct. I think
assessment?
since the inception of portfolio stat, we saved about $2 billion. That's separate from the data center efforts at $4 billion.
And can you explain a little bit more how it helps accomplish that?
Well, what it does is it identifies duplicative systems, and a lot of it's low-hanging fruit, email, HR systems, and the like, especially when you have large federated agencies. You see a lot of similar systems that you can consolidate. You can actually, there's opportunities to go to cloud, as Representative Gianforte mentioned, so there's those opportunities for cost savings.
Thank you. And Mr. Washington, in this area, it shows that you guys received a D. So what are the challenges the department is having that make it difficult for you to improve the score in this area?
Man, I don't think that current score is reflective of the progress we've made or the things that we have in place that allow us to effectively manage our portfolio. We engage with the mission areas and all of the agencies on a daily basis. We have processes in place. We do project reviews as well as investment reviews before they go to our executive review board that's chaired by deputy secretaries. We make enterprise decisions on our investments. I have the ability to halt investments, delay investments, or stop projects. So I would say USDA has made a great deal of progress in this area, and the entire department follows our procedures as they are outlined.
And Mr. Powner, from what you're hearing, do you think the scores will increase next time in this area?
I think if
Or what do you want to see more of?
portfolio stat and data centers were really, if that was going well and we were saving, I think the next step with your MGT score, let's see what gets put in the working capital funds and whether there's a churn where we're reinvesting that money in modernization priorities. So the numbers will show that once the working capital funds get populated.
Thank you. Portfolio stat is a vital element of FITARA, helping to ensure that agencies have visibility into wasteful spending and creating a more efficient IT investment process. It's the kind of clearly bipartisan program that the government needs. So thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And my last question, Mr. Washington. Last year's FISMA report, it found that USDA does not have a complete organization-wide risk management strategy in place. What steps are you taking to sort this out?
So we've just completed our 5-year cybersecurity plan. We have a risk management board that we've set up. We work very closely with our IG counterparts to ensure that we're not accepting any additional risk, and we reduce the amount of risk that we have currently in our cybersecurity posture. And we're also aggressively attacking our cybersecurity vulnerabilities. We're complying with FISMA and doing a better job of working with our counterparts in the IG.
Mr. Powner, any opinions?
Yeah, Mr. Washington and I talked about this too. I think you'll see, you want to see those IG scores go up. I mean, they're an average of 2 out of 5. And then also, too, the self-reported cap goal metrics, I think they report meeting 5 of the 10. So you probably want to see that going up over time.
Great. Well, I appreciate it. We made some breaking news today. The CIO is going to report to the agency head. Mr. Washington's going to get an MGT fund that he has control over. So, and that megabyte isn't hard to do. So those are some of my takeaways. I appreciate y'all being here today, and I think we're going to go into a temporary recess in order to have our next panel. Thank you all for the witnesses being here today, and this part is adjourned until we come into the session again.
That's on. It's the most backwards.
The Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order. I'm pleased to introduce our second panel of witnesses. David Powner is staying with us through the second panel. Mr. Dana Deasy, CIO for Department of Defense, Mr. Mark Easton, the Deputy CFO, and the Honorable Kevin Fahey, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisition at the Department of Defense. Welcome to you all, and pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before you testify, so please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. And in order to allow time for discussion, please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. The reminder, the clock in front of you will start blinking yellow when you have 30 seconds left, and red, that means your time is up. Also, please remember to press the button when we start. As usual, Mr. Powner, you're going to start off, and you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. DOD's IT spending is complicated because of national security and classified systems. If you add these two areas together and what they report on the IT dashboard, we believe their spending is in the $45 billion range. Regarding FITARA, I'd like to make a few remarks about its applicability to DOD because there are many claims that DOD is exempt. The facts are that of FITARA's 7 major sections, 2 fully apply to DOD, 1 doesn't, and the other 4 partially do. Key provisions that do apply to DOD are incremental development, dashboard reporting, portfolio reviews, and data center consolidation, all major areas on your scorecard. Despite their low grades across the board, there has been progress on data center consolidation. DOD has closed over 225 large centers and plans to close an additional 360. Regarding their smaller centers, they have closed over 725 and plan an additional 834. So collectively, DOD plans to close over 2,000 data centers. These closures have resulted in nearly $400 million in savings. The problem here is that these savings are way too low. We are issuing our latest data center report today, which highlights how agency savings fare against OMB's targets. OMB's targets for DOD on data center savings is $1.8 billion, and DOD is nowhere near these numbers. Based on our prior data center work, this $1.8 billion target from OMB is too low. When this whole initiative got started, DOD reported to GAO that their savings goal was $4.7 billion. Over the years, they have backed off of this, and we should be talking about DOD saving billions, not hundreds of millions of dollars on their data center efforts. On a related note, their plans to utilize the cloud to consolidate data centers and their application software has the potential for large efficiencies and great benefits to the warfighters as technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning are better leveraged. I'd like to conclude by stating that DOD historically has done their own thing and has not always participated and reported fully regarding their priority IT initiatives led by OMB. Some of this is understandable for security reasons, like their public reporting on cybersecurity, which is blank on your scorecard, but not all of it. We would be in a better position as a nation if DOD led in the federal IT arena. Even the President's executive order last week gives DOD a pass, even though much of that order covers areas that DOD is required to follow under existing law. DOD has pockets of IT excellence, and their lead could greatly help civilian agencies in our overall efforts on cyber and IT management. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my comments.
Thank you. And who's providing the opening remarks for Department of Defense?
I am, sir.
Mr. Deasy, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman, ranking members, and distinguished members of both subcommittees. Thank you for this opportunity to testify before the committees today on the Department's implementation of the Federal Information Technology and Acquisition Reform Act and Modernizing Government Technology Act. I'm Dana Deasy, Day 13, Department of Defense Chief Information Officer. I'm the Principal Advisor to the Secretary of Defense for Information Management, IT, Cybersecurity, Communications, Position, Navigation and Timing, Spectrum Management, Senior Leadership, and nuclear command control and communication matters. These latter responsibilities are unique to the DoD, and my imperative as the CIO is to ensure the department has the information and communication technologies capabilities needed to support the broad set of department missions. I understand that twice yearly, FITARA scoring helps assure greater visibility and management of government IT resources and improve IT cost, schedule, performance, and security. What I'd like to do today is to address the scorecard, starting with incremental development. DoD applies incremental development in the delivery of over 50% of its capabilities, particularly where development efforts are software intensive. The department applies a 12 to 18-month incremental delivery process and continues to improve its approach to software development and move towards the 6-month delivery capability. I intend to continue the department to more agile IT development and accelerate the delivery of incremental, usable, capable to the warfighter. Next, I'd like to talk about enhanced transparency. We take managing investment, program management, and operational risk very serious at the DoD. 68% of the DoD's major IT investment dollars are in programs that we would call the sustainment phase. It is our view there is inherently lower risk associated with these investments. National security systems make up 59% of the 100 investments reported to OMB, including any major IT investment over $50 million in a budget or $200 million in the FIDEP. Ratings for systems designated as national security systems are not made visible to the public, though the risk ratings we report semi-annually to OMB and GAO and include all national security system IT investments. Turning now to portfolio review. DoD IT reform initiatives are focused on consolidating, modernizing, and reducing IT costs across the department. While the department has been slow to achieve savings in the past, our current savings projections for fiscal year 18 through 23 is approximately $3.2 billion. Although FITARA only requires DoD to report on business system savings, our reporting will cover and continue to cover all IT savings. Now let me cover the data center optimization. Over the last 8 years, DoD has closed over 1,000 individual data centers, but has been slow to achieve its savings goals. The delivery of new cloud capability promises to provide commercial solutions that will accelerate data center closures, achieve cost efficiencies, and improve return on investment. Our fourth estate organization has been directed to migrate systems to MilCloud 2.0, which will provide immediate savings and close their data centers in fiscal 18 and 19. In addition, we expect the military departments to also ramp up migrations and closures now that efficient capabilities are readily available. Finally, software licensing. Currently, DoD has good visibility into software purchasing. Enterprise licensing agreements are in place with our 5 largest software vendors and account for over 80% of DoD's commercial software spend. DoD's score is driven by the absence of a baseline inventory of installed software. Completion of the DoD comprehensive software inventory is on schedule for December of 2018, in line with DoD reporting plans submitted to Congress in 2016. In closing, as I move forward in this position, I look forward to working with Congress in these critical areas. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Deasy. Before we get to Mr. Gianforte, welcome. I know it's day 13, and our goal on this committee, which operates in an incredibly bipartisan way, ultimately it's our responsibility to hold agencies accountable, and ultimately FITARA is supposed to hold CIOs accountable, but we can't hold you accountable if you don't have all the authorities you need and ultimately to do your job. And so that's what we have been trying to do as a committee, is to ensure you have all the tools in your toolkit in order to do your job. And with that, the distinguished gentleman from Montana is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman and ranking members. So thank you for being here. This is an important topic, and I appreciate your participating today. I spent 30 years in the private sector building IT systems, many of them for DoD agencies, for Air Force and Army. In fact, we operated one of the first commercial cloud operations in a DISA data center operated by a third party. So we have some experience here. And under FITARA, agency CIOs must certify that the cost, schedule, and performance of the data they provide to OMB's IT dashboard. This is a public, as you're well aware, a public dashboard that's reported quarterly. They must also report the riskiness of major IT investments. However, agencies tend to underreport, and we've seen this as we've gone through our sessions. According to GAO, nearly 2/3 of the investments that GAO identified were underreported on this dashboard. DoD is excluded from having post-investment information on the IT dashboard for national security systems, which makes sense. However, recently DoD reclassified about $15 billion of projects to that category in 2016, allowing the agency to avoid publicly reporting this data. So I have a few questions in this area. I want to start with Mr. Pauner. Why did DoD receive a D for transparency and risk management?
So the D on transparency and risk management is it's a percentage of how many of your reported investments are in the yellow and red area. And the reason we did that is because we saw way too many greens early in this process. We've turned the corner a bit, but they're pretty high on the green with very low risk. And I understand what Mr. Deasy is saying about a lot of that is in the O&M and its sustainment, but we also have a lot of O&M and sustainment that is very old legacy that has some security concerns, and we usually see some of that sustainment that's still in the yellow and red areas because of that.
Okay. And do you have concerns about the ability of the agency to improve its transparency and properly manage the risks?
We've seen great improvements with DoD on what was reported on the dashboard. There's less on the dashboard now, but I can tell you several years ago, I testified some hearings on the Senate side where everything on the dashboard was all green. So it has improved. And I will say the stuff that's not public, we at GAO do get those reports, and we're aware of what's going on.
Well, it's encouraging to see the progress. Just before I turn to Mr. Deasy, in your opinion, Mr. Pauner, what steps should they be taking to increase transparency?
Well, I think in terms of, we understand the national security systems, but I think the more we want to acknowledge risk, a lot of these systems at DoD are heavy on risk, like all IT systems, and the complexity there puts it at another level. So I think that's really what we're interested in, is just the fair acknowledgement of risk so that we can have, less failures and overruns and schedule slippages down the road.
Okay. And Mr. Deasy, how does the agency plan to improve your score for next time?
So as you can see from my opening remarks, my apologies. So as you could tell from my opening remarks, the first step I've done is just try to get a baseline understanding of why the scores reflect what they are. I will be the first to tell you the scores need to improve. I have a fundamental understanding of what needs to be done in many of these categories. Some of them is a case of we actually need to get better transparency inside the Department of Defense. So what do I mean by that? There's a report card here. First question I asked was, break that scorecard down for me by parts of the DoD. I intend on doing that because to answer specifically what needs to be fixed, I have to specifically know where the problems lie. And that's the deeper transparency I plan on putting in place. Okay,
and just reading between the lines then, so in your current position, you don't have full visibility within the agency to the risks and the operations of these IT systems?
I have a full visibility. In other words, I have the ability to understand for any of these programs, to call upon the right people to answer those questions. What I'm referring to more is if I want to understand why we're behind in one particular area that's driving the report card score down, I'm going to need visibility into a deeper level of understanding of the specifics of the report card, which is different than my understanding of where we sit with risk.
And are you getting full cooperation within the DoD to get those questions answered?
I will tell you right now, in the first 13 days, the cooperation has actually been overwhelming. People have been very transparently coming to me saying, what are the things that you need to spend time on? How can we help? how can we help you get the data. And this effort has helped actually hone me and focus me on the things we need to go work on.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, if you could indulge me for one more question. What percentage of the IT investment spending at DOD is currently made public?
Actually, I'm going to have to take that question for the record. I can give you a high-level breakdown of spend, but I'm not sure I have the question today.
There is some concern that the NSS designation has been used to maybe include more than it should. So I would appreciate if you could get back to the committee with an answer to that question. Of the total spend, you said you're tracking it all. What percentage is made public versus that which falls under this other classification? So I appreciate that. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Ranking Member Kelly is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the key provisions of the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act concerns enhancing the authorities of CIOs to plan, budget, and manage information technology projects. When assessing agency implementation of FITARA, GAO examined how this enhanced authority would assist CIOs in certifying that major IT investments are, and I quote, adequately implementing incremental development. Mr. Powner, can you briefly explain what role does incremental development have in the success or failure of an IT project?
Well, if you deliver in smaller chunks, you're usually more successful. We've looked a lot at successful IT acquisitions across the government. Going small is the way to go. I understand with DOD, you know, OMB has a requirement that's 6 months. That's what they mean by incremental. DOD might be a little bit longer than that. I heard 12 to 18. We get that. What they report on the dashboard and what Mr. Deasy's saying about those, we got a disconnect on the data there. Your percentage is a lot higher, and we'll work through that, try to get to a better understanding. But right now, the OMB requirement on 6 months, we have a very low percentage of DOD projects that plan to do that.
Thank you. And the data collected for the scorecard shows that in the area of incremental development, the department did receive an F, and you talked a little bit about incremental development, but can you talk again about what challenges you face in this category? And I know you're new, Mr. Deasy.
So first of all, I'm an absolute advocate around agile development. It's proven time and time again in every place I've seen it develop from private industry to give you much better results, quality as well as the end deliverable actually meeting what the requirement is. It's still the early days for me to understand what is it that drives. I can tell you there will always be some programs that are not well suited for incremental development. The nature of the mission, the nature of the risk that you're undertaking, you're actually going to want to use more traditional methodologies just because you're not going to want to introduce that sort of risk. With that said, I will tell you there will probably be many systems that we'll encounter where we can improve on incremental development.
Okay, when you return, as I'm sure you will, we'll be interested in what concrete steps you're taking in this arena. And then, Mr. Easton, as the Deputy Finance Officer, what support has your office been providing to Mr. Deasy to improve the way the department plans, manages, and develops its IT projects, or the person before him?
Thank you very much for the question. We have a sound partnership. We're both, I would characterize a relationship as both unique and effective. Unique in that, as opposed to other federal agencies, which may have the IT budget within the comptroller shop, we have a partnership and ensure that our CIO has technical expertise to be able to develop and manage the budget. And it's effective in that we are involved on the front end in planning. We have the budgetary expertise that exists within the CIO organization, and then on the other end, we can take a look at after budgets are submitted to review to ensure that they have met the goals and objectives of the order, you know, to include the expectations from these two pieces of legislation.
And that's all the questions I have. I yield back. Yes, I will.
Thank you. I thank my friend. Mr. Fahey, maybe. I have a memo here dated March 16th, 2018, from Thomas Modley, the Undersecretary of the Navy, which he announces that he's abolishing the position of CIO for the Navy, and he is undertaking the responsibilities and authorities of the CIO for the Navy. I don't know that he has a technology background of any kind. What is the rationale for this decision, given the fact that we're trying to move toward empowerment of CIOs? I mean, maybe it would be good if he had transferred the authority to Mr. Deasy, but he didn't.
So, I think the thought process is, as, he is basically the CMO of the Navy, right, and has the authorities to do those jobs, right? But I'll have to look at more.
Does he have an IT background of any kind?
I'm not sure, sir. I'll have to get that for you.
Well, what's the Navy's budget every year?
I'll have to get that for you also.
Pretty big.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So this is not a trivial decision. All right. Well, we look forward to getting some information on that. I yield back.
Mr. Meadows, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you for your leadership in truly making sure that our IT systems not only are effective and efficient, but certainly are brought into the 21st century. Your leadership, not only in chairing this particular committee hearing, is recognized each and every day by both members. And my good friend, Mr. Conley, just brought up a question, Mr. Fay. Let me just tell you, we need to have those answers. I agree with him. I find it just very troubling if we're going to make those kinds of decisions with high-risk systems. And so is 10 days adequate enough time to get those answers back to this committee?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Mr. Deasy, I'm going to, 13 days, so 13 is your lucky number, I guess.
It is, sir.
And I want to say welcome. It's obviously very refreshing to hear your tenacity and being willing to tackle this particular issue. I think the GAO, I see him nodding his head as well. This is something on a bipartisan basis that we really pay close attention to, and so your willingness to engage is certainly to be applauded. Now, the staff has indicated that you said that you're going to have a complete inventory of all software for DoD by September. Is that correct?
By December, sir.
Oh, by December. All right. Well, that's still very aggressive. Your staff behind you started to just go crazy. Don't ever play poker, by the way. But in doing that, so by December, you can have a full inventory. That's a Herculean task. But we applaud that. We'll be looking if we can help assist you in that. I think that would be good. The other issue is if you will work with GAO on some of those dashboard items that, quite frankly, have been problematic, remain problematic, and probably will be problematic on the next dashboard, scoreboard, FITARA Scorecard that we get, to highlight those critical areas first, if you would do that for me, Mr. Deasy. And I just want to say thank you all for your service. Mr. Powner, thank you for continuing to engage on this particular issue. And again, it is a bipartisan effort that you're going to find. And so it is one that we're not going to let go. Chairman Hurd will continue to hold hearings. The pressure starts to ramp up, will ramp up even more as we go on for those that are non-compliant. CIOs are a critical point in that, so if you will take that back to the appropriate decision makers, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Meadows. Mr. Connolly, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair, and I echo what my good friend from North Carolina has just said. On a bipartisan basis, we're concerned about DOD's scoring. On the current scorecard, DOD stands out. It's the only agency to receive an overall grade of F. It's the third scorecard in which you've received an F. You had poor performance in almost every metric we've used in measuring progress in implementing FITARA. And that's all the more striking given the fact that you account for 44.4% of all federal IT spending. And maybe it's higher, because Mr. Powner indicated maybe $45 billion. We're spending about $96 billion. I don't know. Rounding it out, you might be 50%. Mr. Deasy, you've only been there 13 days, and so we're very disappointed in your performance already.
I'll
but,
improve,
but
sir.
let me ask you this, though. You're coming in new, and stipulating you have to be politically sensitive and careful and all that, but coming in new from the private sector, how concerned are you at this performance record, which, after all, if we really want to look at protecting taxpayer investments, the big gorilla in the room is DOD.
Yeah, sir, if you had been in my conference room as I was preparing for this, going through the scorecard, to be perfectly frank, I said, team, putting aside the scorecard for a second, are these not fundamental things you need to do to be a great IT organization? You need to understand your software. You should understand what you're consolidating, how you're getting transparency. Likewise, the culture that I'm looking to improve upon is to make sure that we're doing these things for the right reasons, not just, frankly, to fill out a scorecard. That will then drive the right behavior that then will allow us to get to better outcomes. I can't tell you at this point what that will take in terms of timing, but I can tell you that I have a fundamental belief coming from the outside. There's nothing that you're asking for here that any good CI organization shouldn't just fundamentally do.
And let me just say, you know, this is an unusual exercise in Washington. We have consciously tried to design the scorecard to incentivize, not to punish. This is not a scarlet letter that we all enjoy giving anybody. We're trying to move every agency to a point of performance that can make us all proud. And I think we've been surprised and bitterly disappointed at the lack of cooperation from DOD. And I think it's in the culture, to be honest, because it's not just limited to this. You're the only agency without an unqualified audit. You don't cooperate with GSA in terms of the off-the-shelf procurement policy. You got your own. And you're where the big bucks are. And my friend Mr. Meadows mentioned last November as a warning to DOD that if you frankly didn't come into compliance, if you didn't cooperate, it was going to jeopardize the budget. And this from a conservative Republican. So sooner or later there will be consequences, and we'd rather have a cooperative spirit. That's why that's how we wrote FITARA, and that's how we came up with the metrics. But we agree with you, Mr. Deasy. Look, if you can't measure it, if there aren't metrics to be measured against, well, then it's all aspirational and goodwill, and gosh, we hope it all works out. And the taxpayers deserve better. And I hope you last in the job, and I hope you report to the Secretary, and I hope that the next time we meet, we'll have better news in terms of performance by DOD, because this is very serious business. When I think of the role of technology in our national defense, you know, I'm reading a book on a great book by Toll on the war in the Pacific during World War II, and I'm stunned at the pace of technological change in World War II. Right, in 4 short years, I mean, we transformed everything: submarine technology, air technology, the use of carriers, the retirement of battleships that were obsolete. I mean, just all kinds of incredible technology advances in a very brief period of time. We could never replicate that today with our contractual process, let alone our IT management. And so I worry, for the sake of the country, what could go wrong if DOD is not managing its IT well? And that's really the goal here. It's not to meet some bureaucratic metric. It is to make sure that our national security and our national defense are the best they can be, and IT is key to that. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Mr. Easton, how long have you been in the job?
13.
Oh, no, it's Mr. Easton. We know you 13 days. Yeah.
I said Mr. Deasy.
I've been in this current job for 8 years.
8 years?
Yes.
And Mr. Fahey?
For a little over a couple months. I got confirmed at the end of February.
Gotcha. Mr. Deasy, in your 13 days, have you figured out how many people within DOD have the title CIO?
So I have a org chart that hangs up behind my desk. I'm starting from the premise that Wherever there is an organizational principle, there's probably going to be an associated CIO. We are, I can tell you, taking active steps already on the fourth, where we are looking to consolidate that.
So do you have a number? Can somebody whisper, anybody behind you whisper a number?
The whisper behind my left shoulder says it's about 35.
35 people with the title CIO. Mr. Easton.
Plus mill depths.
Gotcha. A lot. We'll call it a little bit more than 3 dozen. Mr. Easton, does Mr. Deasy have budget authority over those 3 dozen plus CIOs?
He has the authority to review their budget, absolutely. And so the process that we use is a very decentralized, federated process. There is a fair amount of independence, but I think the process allows him to influence the budget.
So if Mr. Deasy believed that there was a system being implemented within the DoD structure, could he turn it off? It was an IT system or an IT spend. Would he be able to kill it?
I think the current process, and I would defer to Mr. Fahey from an acquisition perspective, but the Milestone Decision Authority has that authority, and Mr. Deasy would have the ability to inform that particular individual.
Mr. Fahey, you have some opinions?
Yes, I mean, there's a couple of pieces to that. If, you know, from an IT infrastructure for the department, he has a process that he has a say on that. If it's like a business system program or a weapons system program, there's a process that he's part of the Defense Acquisition Board to consult Ms. Lord in the decisions.
So somebody can overrule him?
Ms. Lord, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, is the final decision for major programs, not necessary for the IT infrastructure.
As Mr. Deasy begins to consolidate, okay, let me ask this, Mr. Fahey, Mr. Easton, should there be 35 plus people in DoD with the title of CIO?
I would say not, and I know, as Mr. Deasy talked about, as he's in the process of figuring out how to consolidate that across the Department of Defense.
Mr. Easton, your opinion on that?
I think that there should only be one CIO. There's only one CFO from a CFO Act perspective, but many people refer to themselves as CFOs. And so I think that the tone at the top that currently exists with the new team is thinking much the same, is to say it's very expensive to not have an enterprise perspective and not have someone at the top of that enterprise.
Mr. Powner, do you have any opinions on this line of questioning?
Yeah, I think clearly, regardless of title, it's the whole, whether they're associate CIOs or not, it's this whole idea of looking across the enterprise and looking for opportunities in the portfolio stat area is one really good example. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit on business systems with a lot of duplication that we could consolidate, go to cloud solutions and the whole bit, and in the process probably improve how we deliver services to men and women within the Department of Defense.
Mr. Easton and Mr. Fahey, do I hear it correctly in that you are supportive in Mr. Deasy's efforts to streamline the CIO organization to include ensuring that he has some of the budget authority over those consolidated process?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to yield to the gentleman from North Carolina.
So, Mr. Easton, let me follow up because something you said troubled me just a bit. To be able to review and to actually have the authority are two different things. And you said review, and I can tell you what that means in bureaucratic language is you can protest, but you don't have the ability to actually stop it. So does Mr. Deasy, will he have the ability to stop it or not?
Historically, I think that has not always been the case. I think with the current management team, Mr. Deasy's authorities that are empowered by the deputy and the secretary can change that.
All right, so let me follow up if the chairman will indulge me. Here's what we do need. we need a directive policy, I guess it would be a guideline from the appropriate heads to give Mr. Deasy this authority. That's what we've been asking for. That's what CIOs need. And quite frankly, especially in DOD, I have been just unbelievably concerned that we have people who do procurement, we have people who do RFPs, we have people who actually implement, and they don't really all talk. In fact, you have silos that almost prohibit them from talking. And what I think the chairman was getting at, we want to make sure that Mr. Deasy, under this new regime, has the ability to make the best IT decisions. And so I need either a plan on how you're going to do that or a response back to this committee on why you can't. Is that fair enough, Mr. Easton?
Absolutely understood.
All right, thank you.
And just to add on what my friend from North Carolina has said, the reason we have problems when it comes to IT is the people making the IT purchasing decisions are not the same people using the IT goods or service. And when we streamline that process, we see effective outcomes. Mr. Easton, I think this next question is probably best for you. Are you familiar with the FY 2019 analytical perspective from the Office of Management and Budget?
I'm not sure that I am, sir.
Okay, well, the Office of Management and Budget a couple of months ago submitted their analytical perspective on the American budget, on the budget for the federal government. In that, I was surprised because most of us generally talk about how the federal government spends $90 billion, that's with the B, dollars on purchasing IT goods and services. And in the FY 2019 analytical perspectives from OMB, the analysis excluded the Department of Defense spending, which was the first year that this was included. So they basically said that the government was spending like $45 billion on purchasing IT goods and services. Were you aware of this change? Do you know why we are not publicizing or talking about the aggregate number that Department of Defense spends on purchasing IT goods and services?
I am not, but I will get back to you.
That would be very helpful because, again, I recognize y'all allow our men and women to keep us safe, and the processes that y'all manage allow them to do that efficiently. And so I appreciate that. And in the past, we've been able to talk about this number in aggregate. So I do not know why there was a change for FY19. I think it's important in order to keep consistency on that. Mr. Deasy, I'll be surprised if you know the answer to these next two questions, but I'm going to ask anyways. And if you don't, I would welcome feedback in a few weeks. How many lines of code? Well, let me ask this: what type of legacy code is being used in DoD?
Sir, I couldn't give you a detailed breakdown of the types of technology or base code that is used. I will tell you that a private industry perspective on lines of code is an interesting measurement, but may not always be the right measurement. Now, what do I mean by that? What we're trying to achieve at the end of the day is fewer systems, more consolidation, taking risk, having more security, and obviously that all drives to lower cost. I've seen many instances over the years, sir, where people get overly fixated on lines of code, and what you end up doing is you end up driving a behavior where you go after the systems that have the most code, but they may be ones that, frankly, aren't the most imperative, aren't going to reduce the risk, and aren't going to make you safer and more secure. So one of the things that I am going to be looking at is how do we think about the right sort of measurements that get us to consolidate the right things first, as opposed to focusing on just lines of code.
Look, I couldn't agree with you more, but I also think it's some of these legacy codes that is preventing us from transitioning into the cloud. It's preventing us to move to systems with more modern language that allows that facilitation to the cloud. And so the question is asked in that, what are we doing? And so that analysis is helpful, and when you do that analysis, would be very interested in seeing that. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Gianforte for another round of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to back up and say, welcome, Mr. Deasy. It's really great to have you here, 13 days in. It's great to have someone with private sector experience working on these problems. And I had just really some encouragement, which is we know we have big issues here. The scores are not good. Recognize that was not on your watch, but you're here to fix it, and I appreciate that. Having sat through many of these hearings, I want to echo the comments of the Ranking Member Connolly and also Chairman Meadows. We are here to help. We've learned a lot of lessons across all of the federal government about the way to improve IT effectiveness. I would encourage you have a friend in Mr. Powner and the GAO. They have experience in many of the other agencies, and having my own experience having delivered enterprise class systems for over 150 federal agencies and nearly 2,000 in the private sector, you will hear organizations don't like to change. You are a change agent, and you will hear, well, DOD is different. We can't do it that way. And you know this, but I want to emphasize it. DOD is not that different. The same practices that apply in the private sector will work at DOD. There are additional security requirements you need to accommodate in the systems. But honestly, most private sector systems today need to do that as well. Being different is not an excuse for not following the rules. So I would just, we are here to help, work with GAO. It's been interesting to see other agencies make rapid transformations, adopting shared services, cloud delivery, consolidation of data centers. Federal agencies, even behemoths like DOD, can change. I'm just glad you're here, and I appreciate the work and look forward to continuing to participate with you in reviewing the results as we come forward. And I just would emphasize the point that was made earlier that the CIO is only the CIO if they have the authority to be the CIO, and that means a veto vote on expenditures related to IT, not just a seat at the table. So we'll look forward to getting your feedback on that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, sir. I'm recognizing myself for another round of questions. To anybody on the panel, what is the percentage of IT spend over the entire DoD budget?
About 6 to 7%, sir.
6 to 7%.
And going back to the question, the original questions, I'm advised that we may have had a timing issue on the posting at OMB. I'll go back and verify that. The IT budget last year closed late, but we do have the budget posted on the OMB website.
Excellent. I appreciate that. Appreciate the clarification. One of the reasons that we do this scorecard is we're trying to go from just keeping track of basic stuff to keeping track of the things that add value to the enterprise, to ensure that the IT organizations are able to articulate their value to the agency and to the broader federal government, and then get to a third phase where we're able to focus on the opportunities. And I think when it comes to DOD, the opportunity is to make sure our warfighters are being able to keep themselves safe and do their job. And Mr. Deasy, I'm in your remarks, I feel like you are looking in that type of direction. One of the questions that I had, we originally asked about the MGT Working Capital Fund. Mr. Deasy, this is a program that we passed here in Congress in a bipartisan way, signed into law, to ensure that a federal CIO has a working capital fund, that if you realize savings within your enterprise, you can put that in a working capital fund, have access to it for 3 years, and it was supposed to be a fund in which the federal CIO has authority over. So when we were asked, and we got a response yesterday, that DOD does not intend to establish an MGT specific working capital fund. So my question is, what is the CIO's authority over existing working capital funds? And Mr. Deasy, if you have an opinion, great, but Mr. Easton, I'm sure you have one as well. Or Mr. Easton, you want to go ahead and start it off?
I think we have, in our response, we coordinated on the response to the letter asking us to take a look at that particular provision. We think that our working capital fund authorities are sufficient to be able to do what we need to do. One of those, within the Defense Information Service Agencies under Mr. Deasy's cognizance, I think we can say that he would have direct authority over. We clearly get your point relative to the importance of the authorities to be able to link the budget and the decision-making authority together. We've committed to reviewing the current authorities, our current working capital funds, and coming back with a plan this summer to ensure that that capability is available within DoD.
Great. Mr. Deasy, have you been briefed on that working capital fund?
I have been briefly, sir. I mean, the concept is sound. It's no different than what we've used in the private sector, i.e., have availability of funds to go in and improve, consolidate, make more secure, whatever it might be, and then the incentive to be able to take that and plow the back in. It's fundamentally sound. The mechanism of how I'm going to work with the gentleman to my left on bringing that to life, that we have not had a discussion on yet.
Well, we're curious in that because, again, Mr. Easton, your commitment to work with Mr. Deasy, so this is something that he has control and influence on, is important. Mr. Deasy, when you were in the private sector, you were a proponent of cloud computing. Unfortunately, as you're going to find out here in the federal government, everybody acts like the cloud is new technology, right, or emerging technology. I have to remind my friends that the cloud has emerged. And how are you approaching DoD's move into the cloud? I know it's a broad question.
Yeah, so I'll keep my comments limited to how we've done this in the private sector. One of the reasons I'm going to do that today, sir, with all due respect, is I'm still going through my OGE 278 financial disclosures. There's some part of the cloud I have not been read into as far as the DoD. I think one of the things, to your point, the cloud is not new. It's been around for a while. We have to be in the right conversation here. Fundamentally, you can look at the cloud as a place where you just lift and shift what you have today, you put it over here, and you suddenly are going to reap savings. You will, but only to a certain extent. The real value of cloud is where you take the time to re-engineer, rewrite your applications to take advantage of some of the inherent characteristics you get in cloud that you do not get in some of your fundamental legacy environments. So part of what I'm looking to do early on is to make sure that when we're having a cloud conversation, we're having in a way we're having the right conversations about what it is we're trying to achieve here. Some will be around cost savings. Some are going to be about improving the way that we can help the fighter. And some of it's going to be about ways that we can help improve stability, sustainability of these systems, and the security of these systems.
What is your opinion on a multi-cloud environment?
It is my belief that in a cloud world, there is no such thing as one solution that's going to solve for all. You're going to always have a need when you build anything where you're going to have specific requirements that are going to be best served by unique providers. That is no different than has always been the case with technology.
Good copy on that. Does DoD have an internal cybersecurity scorecard or a program that y'all look at internally on how you're doing? Have you been briefed on that yet?
Sir, it's my understanding that most recently there has been an effort underway. I think it actually came out as a result of the, my apologies, the OPM breach, where the agency went in, asked everybody to take their highest risk, you know, the classic indication of likelihood of risk and impact of risk. We have identified, I'm told, the most significant areas of where risk lies. and there is a deeper scorecard that sits under that that starts to articulate what is it going to do to actually take your inherent risk and move that down to a more managed risk.
Great. And does your agency's IG complete a yearly audit of the department's cybersecurity posture?
Sir, I don't know. Can't take that question.
I would welcome to take that question. And my last question is actually for you, Mr. Fahey. It's around the cloud as well. Can you explain the acquisition side of the Jedi program? And I'm not talking about Luke Skywalker.
No, sir, I'm not read in on that, but they're basically they're basically in the process of figuring out how to take advantage of the commercial cloud, and they've had a couple draft RFPs out already to get industry feedback, and they're sort of solidifying what the acquisition strategy would be. But my boss, Ms. Lord, ultimately would be the decision authority on the acquisition strategy as we go forward.
Should the DoD CIO be involved in that process?
They are absolutely involved in that process.
Is this what you're referring to, Mr. Deasy, and not being cleared yet?
Yes, specifically conversations that have any content around contractual arrangements, RFP, have not been cleared yet.
Mr. Fahey, do you have any update on the status of the Jedi RFP?
I know they're in the final development of it, and I think that's what they're working through, is what is the final acquisition strategy, right, as you talked about some of the key things of, whether it's a single provider or multiple and things like that. But I know it's in the final throes right now, and the CIO is very much involved in that process.
Excellent. Well, I think we've accomplished a few things here today. We're going to get a baseline accounting of all the software that is being used within Department of Defense. Mr. Deasy is going to get briefed on what kind of working capital funds he has access to, and he's going to get help in ensuring that as we streamline the CIO reporting authorities, the individuals that have the title of CIOs, that he's going to improve his access to the budgetary authority there. Mr. Powner, any parting comments?
I would just, one thought here on your previewing of the cybersecurity grades. We've heard from a lot of agencies on the OMB metrics. We've talked about those metrics. Some of those metrics are very good. But we're also aware of agencies that have metrics in addition to what they report to OMB. So I think it's going to be a healthy discussion going forward about whether we're actually focused on the right metrics across the board and really improve those over time so that we can get right visibility into where we are from a cyber perspective. And I would be very interested in what DOD has, DOD, DHS, Justice, those types of agencies, and the maturity there and how that aligns with what we're currently looking at.
I would agree with you, Mr. Powner, and I think you've heard this already, Mr. Deasy. We expect DOD to be a leader on these areas and a place that we can look to for guidance for the other agencies across the federal government, and we're excited to have you in this position and look forward to watching what you do over the next months and years.
Thank you, sir.
I want to thank our witnesses for appearing before us today. The hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks for any member to submit an opening statement or questions for the record. If there's no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stand adjourned.